the mental game. Tell me if this sounds familiar, right? Like a pro athlete becomes a pro athlete twice. First mentally, then physically. Right? It's not like a pro athlete becomes a pro athlete first physically, and then mentally they start catching up. Think about it like, well, listen, I'm going to sit around on the couch, I'm going to eat potato chips, and then when the Lakers call, when they offer me the contract, you bet I'm going to go to the gym. You bet I'm going to work out. No, you mentally have already become a pro athlete. Like you're already hitting the gym, you're already obsessed, you're already putting in all the work before you get that contract. Obviously, you become a pro athlete mentally first, then you become one physically. Same could be said for entrepreneurs. Well, listen, I'll start thinking like an entrepreneur, once I become that entrepreneur, once I get my own business set up. No, first you become one mentally. You go the extra mile, you're working harder than what you're getting paid for, and then you start realizing that, hey, I've kind of got the habits of that entrepreneur. Maybe I should become one. Then you physically catch up. So I want to paint a picture that I hope we can all relate to just really highlight, the challenges of really the mental game, right? Both scenarios, we're going to the gym. We're setting the alarm to wake up early. We're going to go to the gym. Scenario number one, the alarm goes off. You're like, oh, I don't want to work out. It's still dark outside. You give in to comfort, right? You got a nice warm bed. You don't want to, touch the cold floor. And you decide, you know what? Tomorrow's a better day to go to the gym. You subscribe to the procrastinator's credo, as I like to call it. The procrastinator's credo says, tomorrow is always the best day to get something done. Never today. So I'll do that tomorrow. How do you feel when that happens? Well, me personally, I feel like a piece of trash all day long. Thank goodness I haven't had one of those days in a long time. But on those days that I did have that, man, all day long I just felt weak. Like, really, Jamie? You caved to comfort? You needed that extra hour of sleep? Of course I'm not getting any sleep. I'm feeling guilty. I'm restless, so I feel like a piece of trash all day long. The pain just lingers all day long. Versus scenario two, alarm goes off. I don't feel like doing it, but I override my feelings. I decide to get up anyway. I go to the gym. How do I feel on those days? Well, initially I feel like I'm in pain because obviously I'm working out. I'm abusing my body. So there is 60 to 90 minutes of that pain. But I feel like a rock star at the end of the workout because, Jamie, you did something you didn't feel like doing, like good for you. So again, both those scenarios, they start off the same. And really that mental game, the thinking process that happens before the action, what's that all about? So this episode is really dedicated to what can you do? What are the tips that I have on mastering the mental game? So here we go. I want to share a couple of stories that I think are going to really hit this point home on really mental toughness and the challenge that we have before I dive into really my two tips on, what do you got to do to succeed in this mental game. One of them years ago, Eric Greitens, okay? We had a chance to have Eric speak at one of our events. And here's a guy who is not only a Navy SEAL officer, he was a Navy SEAL trainer. And boy, did this guy, his PowerPoint slide was unbelievable as he's describing just the mental anguish that these warriors have to go through. And so Buds, right, he's just describing just how difficult this is and the lack of sleep that these guys have. And, there's a dropout that's constantly happening. And so interesting, they'd have a truck following them around everywhere the group went. And there was a bell on the truck. And at any point in time, you could go to the truck, you could ring the bell. And that was your way of saying, listen, I tap out. So there's this amplified noise going on. So everybody knows there's another guy that quit. There's another guy that dropped. They put on a nice warm blanket. They give you some hot chocolate. Like, oh, here you go, civilian. No problem. Take it easy. The rest of the guys, you got to power through, right? And so he's describing all these scenarios. One of the scenarios, I'll never forget, just the PowerPoint picture. These guys have their hands tied behind their backs, their feet tied together. They have to jump into the deep end of a pool and retrieve their snorkel mask at the bottom of the pool and tread water with the mask in their mouth. Again, just picture it. Your hands are behind your back, your feet are tied together. You got to swim like a dolphin. I can't remember how long they'd have to do this, but I mean, it sounds a little dangerous. I mean, I think before jumping in, I might have a little mental anguish before I jump in, right? So just scenarios like this, just really difficult training, no question about it. So then he's describing how I think like night 5 or 6, right? They line everybody up on the beach as the sun is setting. This is all happening down in San Diego. And he's painting this picture how it's almost like a romantic sunset, right? Like sunset's coming down, the waves are crashing on the beach, and like it's real, you know, if this wasn't Buds or Navy SEAL training, like this is an ideal, you know, beautiful dinner spot or something like that, right? And so he's driving around, got a megaphone as everybody's just, you know, standing on the beach looking at the sunset. Tonight's going to be the worst night of your life. This is going to be hell tonight. Get ready. So he's really getting inside people's heads. He says that more people at that time go to ring the bell and tap out than at any other time in Bud's training. Like, isn't that interesting? It's not in the actual act of doing something that somebody's like, hey, listen, I'm treading water. I can't do it. I'm going to drown. I tap. No, it's while they're thinking about what's coming is when they decide to quit, not in the actual doing it. And of course, that makes sense to me because once I've decided to go to the gym, yeah, it's not that bad, Jamie. Like, it was really the mental anguish in bed wrestling with myself that was much more difficult. But I thought that was interesting that the Navy SEALs, the majority of the people that drop, they're dropping while they're thinking. They're not dropping while they're doing. I want to share with you my worst day in the field. I've been asked that question enough times over the years that really made me ponder. And so the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, yeah, there is one day in particular that was worse than any other day. And it was a day where, I just didn't feel like going into the field. And we can all come up with our own reasons to why we don't feel like it, whether it's like, man, I'm just tired of the mental abuse, you know, from mean customers or just the rejection or the bad weather. I mean, so this was a combination of everything. I was tired. I was just mentally not in it. I was not doing so well and yada, yada, yada. Just didn't feel like doing it. So I drive out to the field and I get to my territory and listen, I just don't feel like doing it. So then I say to myself, you know what? Maybe I just need a little rest. Let me recline my seat. Let me just get a little rest because obviously I'm tired. Well, you know, just paint that picture, right? It's not like I'm going to get any sleep, you know, in my car. You know, just feeling like I'm guilty, right? Like, okay, so I'm not, okay. Jamie, you got to get motivated. You got to get pumped up. So I put some music in my car. I'm blasting it, trying to get the music to get the adrenaline going. That ain't working. And long story short, all day long in my car, I am sitting in my car just going through this mental anguish. It's getting towards the end of the day. Again, when I say all day, I mean all day. It's getting towards the end of the day. I fudge a tracking sheet, okay? I mean, I don't recommend this to anybody. I'm fudging a tracking sheet. Guilty, you know, don't do that. I didn't fudge any numbers, right? I didn't commit fraud to the client or anything like that. Just like my contacts. I wasn't being honest about my contacts. And so at the end of the day, I'm then having a conversation with my fearless leader, Rob, and he's asking me how the day went. I'm like, oh, you know, it's a rough day, a slow day, you know, there's not a lot of decision makers, blah, blah, blah. And Rob is being so kind and so nice and so positive. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, Rob, I just lied to you. And so this was the worst day for me for two reasons. One is just poor character on my part. I lied to my leader. Note to self, don't ever do that again. I just felt like garbage for doing that. And the second thing is, really, Jamie, you lacked the courage. You sat in the car all day long. You come up with excuses of why you couldn't go in the field. Then you make up excuses to Rob when you're telling him why your performance was nil. By far the worst day of my life. And at the end of the day, I said to myself, this is never going to happen again. I am never going to compromise my character and lie to my leader. Eventually I came clean and, you know, apologized to Rob, but I don't ever want to do that. And I never want to lack the courage to get out there and do it. So again, why the mental anguish and how do we overcome this mental anguish? How do we win the mental game? 2 tips. All right. Tip number 1, is take action, do, get moving. Tony Robbins says motion creates emotion. So you go to any of his events, I mean, he's always getting you to move around. He sees anybody getting sleepy, he gets that blood moving. Just do. I think of a Winston Churchill quote, and I think he's, the perfect guy to say this quote, considering what they went through when the Nazis were bombing England. He's like, when you're going through hell, keep going. In other words, don't stop, take selfies, take pictures, just keep moving when you're going through hell, right? Years ago, this was interesting. A good friend of mine, Tedford Pica, his brother Joe Pica, as big of a stud as Teddy is, right? Joe was telling me how he biked on a bicycle from Montana to California. And he had, I want to say a 10-speed or something like that. He had a basket, and all he had was a stick of sausage, a tarp, so when he could sleep, he could just get some shelter from the elements, from the rain and stuff like that. And he biked, he had his food and biked. And I'm like, that's just fascinating. It took him many days to make this journey. And I asked him, like, what was that like? I'm assuming the hardest part is once you kind of hit Colorado, when you hit the Rockies, when you're in the mountains. And he's like, oh yeah, for sure. I'm like, what's that like when you're biking up to the top, right? You get to the top of a hill and all you see is mountains. I mean, so the journey ahead of you, it's nothing but mountains. You can't see any flat land in front of you. What was going through your mind? And he said to me, he says, Jamie, I just got into mush dog mode. I'm like, mush dog? He goes, yeah, just picture, dog sleds. Like if you're a dog in a dog sled, it's just left, right, for hours. And he says, I just turned my brain off and just got into mush dog, just left, right for hours, for days. But he was in the act of doing. He didn't allow himself to stop and think about what he's doing, because if he did, he might have just booked a flight and, hey, Teddy, come pick me up at the airport, and not have made that journey. So I think there is something magical about, listen, just do, turn your brain off. Sometimes your brain can be your worst enemy. Stop thinking, just do. Action is resolution number one. My second tip is to question your resolve and commitment. Okay, question your resolve and commitment. Resolve is defined as this: firm determination to do something. Firm. I want to read this quote. I've said this before on other HEP huddles. I'll say it again. Just listen closely to this. He says, Stephen Covey, in the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, only the disciplined are truly free. The undisciplined are slaves to moods, appetites, and passions. Really? I'm a slave? If I'm undisciplined, slave to my mood, my appetite, passion? The successful person has formed the habit of doing things that failures don't like to do. Successful people don't like doing them either, necessarily, but their dislike is subordinated by the strength of their purpose. Again, if your resolve and commitment is higher than your emotions, your moods, appetites, all that stuff, you'll do it. So again, question, what is your resolve? What is your commitment? I've said this before, leading offices, right? I'm addressing, a sales team about to hit the field. And I'll mention this. I'm like, listen, let's just work on your motivation. Let's just, think of a horse, right? And, you've got a carrot you can chase, a positive motivation, or you got somebody cracking a whip on your butt, right? A negative motivation. I mean, both motivations work, but just picture this for a second. If I gave you a bonus, if I gave you $1 million today, if you hit your sales quota, does anybody here question whether or not they'd hit their target? Like, is anybody like, I got a little doubt, Jamie. It all depends, it depends on the territory and depends. No, everybody without a doubt, if you got a 7-figure bonus for hitting your numbers today, there's no doubt everybody would hit it. Okay, so there's the carrot. So that's obviously working. What about a little whip? What if you got a phone call from a real bad dude that says, hey, listen, I kidnapped a loved one, and if you want to see your loved one by the end of the day, you got to hit your sales quota. Is there any doubt? Right, here's some negative motivation for you. Is there any doubt that you'd hit your target? Like, of course you get up and do it. You don't want something bad to happen to a loved one. So both those scenarios work. So it's never the territory, the product, the client. It's always the incentive, right? Like, Well, just give me a better incentive, Jamie, and sure, I'll get there. I mean, obviously, it's not so much the incentive, it's more, do you know how to motivate thyself? I tell my kids all the time, because, you're going to be an entrepreneur. Is that one of the career options for you? And I always say this: the minimum requirement to being an entrepreneur, the minimum requirement to being self-employed is self-motivation. You got to know how to motivate thyself, because if you don't, you don't have a boss to get you to do things, right? So if you ever get to the point where you just accept that, listen, I just don't have self-motivation, I'm not good at it, no problem. You outsource that motivation to a boss. And you just have to accept that. Like, oh, that's a hard pill to swallow. I don't think I ever want to accept that. Okay, great. Let's get the muscles of self-motivation going. And I really think that muscle starts with questioning your resolve, your commitment. So those are my 2 tips for you, really, on how to overcome the mental game, right? To find a way to win.